I want this to be as helpful as it possibly can. So feel free to comment, and I'll answer questions. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I'll also be looking and incorporating things. What would probably be super helpful if you can is to type in the ages of your children, because I think that might be helpful in terms of, because it has a helps me in terms of the dynamics. So I think before that, for me, when we talk about siblings, and managing sort of sibling dynamics, it's really important. There's some context that we need to I think is helpful to think about initially. And then there's the what do we practically do? So I am, just for context, I'm one of three. I am the middle child. There is definitely something about middle children. So I'm happy to field any questions about that. And I have, so there, in terms of age gap, my brother is the eldest, and there's 7 years between him and me. And then between my sister and I, there's just over 2 and a bit years. Um, and I've got two children, and the age gap is 3.5 years, pretty much. So there's definitely some challenges that happen specifically because of ages. But what I will say is that the age difference between your children is never ever going to change. But there are certain stages of their life where the age difference can feel bigger, and there are certain times where the age difference can feel smaller, and that can feed into the whole sibling dynamic. So we've got a 3 and a 6-year-old, okay, both girls, 9, 11, and 14. Right, so you've got a middle child, Pia. Two boys, 5 and 2. The older has, okay, perfect. So that will play out as well. Are 3 and 6 months. Okay, perfect. Right, I'm going to speak to all of that, hopefully, and try and help. Monica, for those of you who are just joining, if you've got a moment, it would be brilliant if in the chat you can write the ages of your children, which will probably help. So let's start off with some context. So the first thing I would say is, and you probably hear this all of the time, but sometimes it's good to hear it again, is that sibling dynamics are a normal part, and there is perfectly normal and healthy as part of development for there to be frictions between siblings. They're vying, both or three or however many children you have, they're vying for a limited resource, which is you. So that is always going to be playing out, as well as there being a dynamic in that as human beings, we're constantly comparing ourselves. And the comparison is the most acute in our home with our siblings, because of course that's where we spend time as children. That's where our children spend most of their time. And it's also where they feel is their safe space. So that's probably why we get some of that. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing that I would say is that it goes back to this idea that it may well be more pronounced, the sibling frictions at certain ages and stages. So let's just so I'm just going to take Pia's three children on the basis that there are three, because it can sometimes be really helpful. So if we look at a 9, 11, and a 14-year-old, in lots of ways, when the younger two, let's say were 7 and 9, and then you would have had a 12-year-old, the 7 and 9-year-old would have probably naturally got on better, as in that there would have been a natural play, but the eldest would have found it possibly childish because at 12 you're now in secondary school, and that can create some challenges. Or what can happen is the two, because they're of the similar age and stage, is that there can then be some friction. What you now find when you start looking at 9, 11, 14 is the 11-year-old probably will find the 9-year-old more irritating, but feel closer to the 14-year-old. So that will obviously play out even when you've got two children, is that it just changes at the different age and stage, as whether do I feel my sibling, I have things in common with them, they understand the stages that I'm going through and the things that I'm juggling, or do they appear to me to now be so far removed from my experience, and they're being childish and they're just being annoying. So that can play out. So it can feel sometimes like, well, they used to get on so well. What's happened? And it can sometimes just simply be a stage that they're going through because of what else is going on in their lives. Um, So that you can find that that's pronounced at particular ages and stages. The other thing that I would say as part of the context is that what I will say, and I don't know if anyone has found this playing out, is that children will naturally do the whole playing off. You love so and so more than you love me. And then we find ourselves getting caught in that trap of, I love you all equally, and then trying to be equal. I would encourage you to remove the equal, particularly around time, and instead be focusing in on needs. So let me give you an example. So I'm just picking on some of the ages because it's super helpful. So when we've got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, the 6-year-old needs us to sit in some extent because homework is probably still quite early on and is an interactive process and requires us to be actively involved. However, the 3-year-old also needs us because the 6-year-old can crack on with something independently, but there are certain things that the 3-year-old is probably going to still need our help with, whether that's going to the toilet, whether that's getting dressed, other aspects, or maybe just play. They kind of need us as part of that scaffolding with that play. So it's about being aware that when you then get potentially an older child saying, but you always seem to spend all the time, and some of you have got younger children with the baby, you're always with them. You love them more than me, instead of trying to do the whole equal, but I'm giving you equal time and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, instead, try to communicate the needs. So at the moment, your younger brother isn't able to do X, Y, or Z on their own, and it isn't safe for them to do that. And so they need me because I need to feed them, or they can't pick up the cutlery on their own, or I'm having to breastfeed, or I'm having to bottle feed, or they're not able to bath themselves or shower, and so they need more of my time. So it's really trying to focus on that need, because when we focus on need, it's a very tangible thing that our children can see. And when we get our older children, is when our early school child then becomes 9 or 10 and is then independent and capable to get on with their own homework, but they've got a sibling that's 5 or 6, we can then remind them that when you were at this age and stage, you needed me to sit with you to help you with your homework, and that's what I'm doing. So I think that helps, because it also helps where we have got children who have additional developmental needs, because again it is about your sibling is particularly anxious, your sibling finds this processing this particularly difficult, your sibling needs me to help them with certain things, so that when we focus on need, it then is a much more tangible and an easier thing, for them to be able to understand. So I think that one is, the other thing that I would say is, and I'm not sure if you've fallen into this trap, I think we all do at some point, is that you may have been parented with that notion of, when you were children, about you must love your siblings because they'll be there for you in the long term. When we're long gone, your siblings will still be here. You need to love them. And I think, of course, we want our children to love each other. Of course, we want them to get on. But I think it's important that we also acknowledge and we say that it's okay not to like them, but that love is a deeper love, and you can still love someone, you can still show a respect for someone, you can still treat somebody with the respect that you would expect them to treat friendships in any other walk of their life, whether that's at a childminder or at a preschool or school, and it's okay not to necessarily like them. So I think that's quite an important thing that I would say we do. Whereas I think sometimes because often it just creates this extra pressure on children that what's wrong with me because I don't like my brother at all, or my sister, or I hate them. I think acknowledging goes absolutely against the grain in terms of what we feel as parents. But it's okay that you find your brother really annoying, or that you're really jealous that you feel that they're getting all of my time. Acknowledge how they're feeling, because that is really powerful. And then the final thing that I would say is, be aware that there will be a family dynamic that is playing out in some way. And this will be a big part. If you are finding that there is a dynamic that is playing out on a regular basis, Some of it will be developmental, some of it will just simply be we've got children that are not yet able to communicate their needs, and therefore the dynamic that's happening, whether that's pushing or biting or unkindness, is coming from I just can't really articulate what I want, what I need, as well. But it's also being aware that our children end up creating roles for themselves. So just think about the role that you might have had within your family. I've jested about this idea about middle children, but we all end up with a role. There'll be the funny one, the naughty one, the little helper, the lazy one, whatever it is. Every single child will have either inadvertently through the language that we use have got a role. And sometimes that might be that, they're the older sibling, and when a baby comes along, we then call them the little helper, and your big brother, your big sister, and that sticks with them. Or it may well be more subtle than that, and they have just created a particular role for themselves. I'm the one who's always in trouble. I'm the emotional one. I'm the naughty one. I'm good, whatever that might be. But those roles will then play out against within siblings. So if you've got a sibling who maybe is just more naturally more of an active child, maybe they don't like sitting still. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean that they're hyperactive, but just simply a child who engages with the world in a busy way, moves around a lot. And then you've got another child that maybe engages in the world in a quieter way and maybe can keep themselves occupied in lots of ways. What can play out is the active one creates this pattern of thinking that I'm, particularly if they're, can you just sit still at the table? Why can't you sit like your sibling? We say it by accident, we don't always mean it, or we might praise the other one, but not the active one. What happens is because that comparison is happening all of the time, our active child builds a narrative within their mind that they are not as good, they are not as loved. Maybe the feedback that they feel that they get is always about their busyness and their activeness. And so that can fuel the a conflict around siblings that then plays out, and it never plays out in an obvious way. Our active child doesn't say, I feel as if I'm being labelled in a particular way, and therefore I don't like that my sibling never seems to get told off. It doesn't happen that way. Instead, it plays out in terms of the way that they interact with each other. It can sometimes be that it's important to remember it's all about perception. It's how your child sees themselves within the dynamic of the family and how they perceive the others within the dynamic of the family. So if you've got a child who's particularly shy, maybe they really struggle with making friends. Maybe they're going through a bit of a tricky time at school and they're struggling with friendships or at playtime. And their perception doesn't necessarily have to be true, but their perception is their sibling, everything's like a water off a duck's back. They're always smiley. They've got such a happy predisposition. Everyone seems to warm to them. Then, of course, that's going to create a dynamic because if you're feeling like I've got all of this worry and angst and I just really struggle, and they seem to be like everything's easy for them, they try anything and it's flat, then that will obviously play out as well. So be aware that if you are having big conflicts at home, try and take a step back. Obviously, I'm going to now talk about how we can manage it, how we can kind of manage it practically. But a lot of this context has such a big, it's almost like the soil in which that sibling dynamics cultivate and germinate and grow. And if we're just looking at that, well, it's not growing quite the way that I want it to, that won't address the core bit, which is the soil that it's growing within. The dynamic is youngest brother and oldest sister again. Youngest brother and oldest sister against the middle. That's interesting. Okay, so you've got that in lots of ways, Pia, because of the age difference. It's almost like that works really well. And actually the similarity in ages, whether it's with the youngest or whether it's the oldest, is not working as well. Um, and so that's then feeding into that narrative. So let's talk about what we can do. One of the things that happens around sibling dynamics, particularly when it's sibling arguments, is that we find ourselves getting caught into this trap of refereeing. We've all had something like this happen. We're in one part of the house, our children are in another part of the house, and everything has been absolutely fine. Voices then begin to get louder and louder. And before we know it, there's an almighty kind of like that, that whole thing that gets us right here. It's that sharp intake of breath and then that absolute wail of a cry. And then you get the padding of the feet as the children rush to kind of tell you their story, and you've got one child telling you this is what's happened and the other child's crying, and we do that whole my goodness me what's happened, and then you take the versions of the stories. In those sort of situations, what happens is we end up refereeing. We end up listening to one person's version, which is never accurate because as humans we're never accurate, and then another version, and then we try and make a decision based on that. I want to encourage you to try and intervene earlier before it gets to that point, because my view is you can't referee something that you haven't witnessed. Because the problem with that is it will lead to this notion of favoritism. Now, let's face it, we know our children very well. We know which one is the provoker, which is the one that tends to lose it, which one is often the victim. Now, we know that, but if we haven't seen how that incident has escalated to the point that it has escalated to, we're always going to fall into that trap that feeds into that whole, well, you love them more than me. You always take their side. It's not fair because you can't objectively say, Jack, you did X and Sophie did Y before that, and that is not okay because you don't have that objective lens. So 100%, if you have seen something escalate and it's become a hitting, biting, pushing, whatever it might be, or poor use of language, absolutely get involved because that's much more to do with general day-to-day parenting. If you haven't, then it's not something that you can referee. I can see that this is really upsetting, and Sophie, you're really upset. Something's clearly happened, and I could hear voices raised, but I wasn't there. May I suggest? And then at that point, I just suggest that we just have a bit of time on our own. Let's play a different game. Sophie, why don't you go and do this? Jack, why don't you go and do that? I'm going to be here so that we're not appearing to take sides by spending time with one over the other, but instead focusing on, right, I can hear voices being raised. I've got a hunch that this is going to go south. And so, right, I'm going to go in now and see if we can de-escalate it. And the ways to de-escalate it, there's a couple of ways to do it. Now, I'm painfully aware that we do not have loads of time. So I know that this is time consuming, but what I will say is if you are really honest with yourself in terms of a reflective audit of the sibling arguments and how much time you spend trying to manage it in the moment and then pacify afterwards, I'd say it's worth the investment. Now, you don't have to do this 100% of the time, but if you could just do it one time out of the sibling conflicts that you're dealing with, it will begin to have an effect, and then try and do it 2 times. So I'm not asking you to do it with every single time because we have multiple other things that we need to do. But the idea would be if you are in a separate room, you begin to hear that voices are beginning to raise, but they've not yet reached that tipping point where it's then suddenly going to go. You go into the room and just say, oh, I'm hearing voices that don't suggest to me that we're kind of having a great time playing. Is this something that you guys can manage, or is it best that we kind of separate and do different things? So if it's like, no, we're fine. No, it's fine. We'll sort it. It's right. That's fine. Okay, great. I've got every faith that you guys can get it sorted. You leave. If it begins to escalate again, then you go back in. And this sounds like voices that doesn't seem to be working. I think maybe let's just try and have a bit of 5 minutes doing other things, and then try and separate it. So what we're trying to do is go in and then tell them in advance that this doesn't sound like a cooperative type of play. It doesn't sound like we're having a good time. Sounds like that things are just not working out. Do we need some time? Do we need some time to be doing other things, or do we think we can come to a solution? Do you think we can work it out together? And if it never escalates, but the voices just keep getting raised, you can just keep going back in. It's that reminder of, oh, oh, you're going to sort it out yourselves. Amazing, fabulous. But when it feels like, and we all know what that level is going to be for our own families, it's about then going in and saying, right, I know you guys have tried really hard to get this sorted, but I think maybe for now, let's have a bit of time separately, and then we can always come back and regroup. Then we can be part of a sort of a mediating, let's think about how we can find a solution. And that might be, I don't know, maybe they're trying to watch a television. One wants to watch one program, wants to watch another different program, and there's squabbling about that. Maybe it's about toys. One wants to play with the particular toy, the other one doesn't. Maybe you've got one child who just simply wants to do something on their own and they've got another sibling interfering. So it can work in all sorts of ways. So I think that would be the first thing that I would do is to really try to see if we can get in before things escalate. The second thing to consider is that we want to really try and respond to the motive behind the behavior. So you've no doubt in parenting books or webinars or other things or podcasts, heard this idea about responding to the emotion behind the behavior. So when our children have experience a big emotion, maybe there's back chat, maybe they throw something, maybe they say something that's unkind, maybe they push, maybe they bite. Yeah. So that behavior is simply a lens into how your child is feeling. So we can either respond to it as in, this is a behavioral problem and I'm dealing with that behavior is inappropriate, or instead, which I find is more effective, and it works exactly the same with siblings, is we look for the emotion behind the behavior and we acknowledge that. So I can understand, I can see, Jack, that you're really annoyed with your brother. Because every single time you keep trying to get on with your Lego, he keeps coming in the way and keeps moving things and keeps breaking stuff and is coming into your bedroom when he shouldn't be. I could understand how annoying that is. I've acknowledged your feelings. However, it's not okay, Jack, to push him. It's not okay to slam the door in his face. Whatever that is we're acknowledging that it's okay to feel annoyed, it's okay to feel frustrated, but it's not okay to then cross this particular line in terms of how you then respond. So we're really always looking, because when we do that, we'll probably over time begin to spot some specific patterns about what it is that is the particular trigger for our child. So is it that they're at a particular age and stage where the way that we've got stuff set up at home is that actually there's a lot of conflict because this child is of a certain age where they're now playing with intricate things, and they and as a result, and this child is still quite young, that they don't quite understand the concept of that's my siblings and that I can't necessarily do, it's getting in the way. So it's working out, it's it's helping us sort of understand a little bit more of that. And what it does do is it acknowledges that it's okay to have these feelings, but what we're trying to help them to do is correct their behavioral response, which, even though young children feel is out of their control, is within their control, but they're more likely to make better choices when we do that acknowledgement piece. So that would be a big one. And being aware of the role that your child has either created for themselves or feels that has been created for them, I think is a crucial other piece to the jigsaw as well, because it will help you understand where some of their behavior what it might be rooted in. I would also say find opportunities to have individual time. Now, I'm not trying to add on a huge additional burden for you as parents. Life is busy enough as it is. And it doesn't have to be equal, but it's looking for opportunities within the normal day to carve out that individual time. So that individual time doesn't have to be, right, I now need to go from one child's bedroom to the next child's bedroom. Or I've got to play with this child for 30 minutes and therefore I've got to play with this child. It's just simply going back to this needs within the normal day and within the needs that they have. Can I cultivate within that some exclusive time for that child? So it might be, I've got an older child who's supremely independent. They can bath themselves, they can shower themselves, they can get themselves into bed. So actually, they're much older. They could maybe be given 15 minutes of extra. They go to bed later. So actually, I'm going to grab my time with them later. That's individual time. Whereas this child, I know that I can grab that time because they still want a book at bedtime. So I'm going to grab my time then. Or I'm going to grab my time with this one, because this one is not able to have a bath on their own, and so they need me or a shower or whatever it is, and that's part of what they want. Or maybe it's just simply this child is the child that I get to pick up from school or nursery, and actually we've got some time before their siblings come home, and so actually that's where they get their time. So it's really looking at where can I create that one-on-one time with each child without adding to my to-do list, making my day longer, but instead validating that, because what it does do is it gives you an opportunity. If you are spotting patterns of behavior with your children, you can begin to have those conversations. So I've noticed that there's a lot of, bath time doesn't work particularly well, or I've noticed that you're not playing quite so well with your sibling the way that you used to. Are you finding things a little, I've noticed that you're feeling a little bit more frustrated. Do you want to talk about it? So it's that we provide opportunities not only to give them their individual time, but also to maybe talk through some things that might be particularly going on for them. Um, and I would then also factor in within when you're looking at your week. So this possibly is more likely to be a weekend sort of thing, but actually working on integrating some family cooperation and connection time. Siblings, managing the sibling dynamic is a really great way for our children to understand conflict resolution, communication, problem solving, being creative. And when our children are very disconnected, um, particularly when we've got school-aged children who are going their own way, or even nursery, but children, when they're away from each other, and then they have these intense periods of time that they are together, sometimes they need that structure that allows us to give them that connection and that cooperate, getting them back into that connection and that cooperation, which may well need to be us providing that framework. It doesn't necessarily need to be us going on a family trip. It just needs us initially kind of reminding them about how that their connectedness, and particularly, I think, lots of parents find any long period of time, whether that's school holidays, summer holidays, Christmas holidays, can be particularly fractious because, of course, our children have spent so much of their time being apart from each other, and now they're in this intense together a lot of the time. So it's about being able to rebuild that connection, that cooperation, whilst also respecting that each child within your family also needs their own individual needs honoured in some shape or form, in terms of them having their quiet time and their space to be able to do that. The only other thing that I will add before I take questions is that if you're in a situation where you've got children sharing bedrooms and that is playing into the dynamics, then it's about trying to create opportunities within the bedroom to make it's almost like you want to have specific times where it's one child's bedroom and the other one has to be somewhere else, and then you swap it round. That can also create challenges because it's almost like they don't feel that they've got a space that is their own. So we can artificially create that in terms of almost like time zones. Between this time and this time, it's your bedroom. Between this time and this time, it's your bedroom. And then all the rest of the time is a cooperative bit.